how the resistance movement in Lebanon, for example, with this Karbala spirit, was able to resist and to defeat the fifth largest and most powerful organized army in the world. Implied by the fact that the Khulafa Rashidun are the ones that are running it.
Correct.
All right? It's
rightly
a spiritual,
guided. It is spiritual also.
Also, from that perspective.
Yeah.
Who is your Yazid? Who is the Yazid in your environment, in your workplace, in your university, on the street, in the government? Who is the Yazid that you have to deal with?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of Jumah Nights. As you all know, we are now out of the mourning period of Muharram and the period of Imam Hussain, and now we are moving into periods of happiness, inshallah. Let's take a moment though to discuss how important is the philosophy of Karbala in today's age, and how is it relevant to the rest of our lives in the rest of the year. And in order to do that, inshallah, we are joined today by Shaykh Ahmed Haneef. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
For those of you who don't know Shaykh Ahmed Haneef is a scholar of Islam. He went to Iran in Qom in 1993, and he stayed there and studied there for 19 years. He's also studied political science in Britain and in Canada. Inshallah, we're very, very honored to have you. Very huge opportunity to speak to you, and thank you so much for making the time to come here.
Thank you. The pleasure is also mine.
How have you been, Sheikh?
Alhamdulillah, not bad. The struggle continues.
Alhamdulillah. So, do you want to get straight into the topic, or
Sure.
do you want to start with a few icebreakers?
Let's go do this.
Yeah? Okay. With regards to the philosophy of Karbala, right? And obviously we've now come out of the mourning period. How important is it to know the aims and objectives of Imam al-Hussain when we are talking about Karbala in the rest of the year? How important is this identity as a Hussaini in the rest of the year outside of the month of Muharram?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I think it's very important to look at Karbala as meta history. Okay, we have history as something that happened in the past that may not have anything to do with us, right? Like, for example, I don't know, we read the history of Greenland, you know what I mean? And you're living in the Caribbean, it might not have anything to do with you. It depends on how you look at that history, you see? And then you could look at history as a lesson. You have the famous saying that says a person or people who does not know their history would be condemned to repeat the mistakes that they have made. Okay, so that's history as a learning exercise. And then you have history, what I would call it meta history, which is history that repeats itself. History that appears with different actors on different stages, but are saying the same thing. And I think Karbala is like this. Now, in terms of its relevance, I think, it is more than just meta history in the sense that it is occurring in the outer world, in the physical world, in different forms. It also occurs in the inner world. In other words, Karbala and Ashura and all of the actors on the field of Karbala are all tendencies within the human soul. You see, so each and every one of us has a Hussaini tendency, or a Hussaini perspective, an Abbasi perspective, a Zainabi perspective, a Shimri perspective, a Yazidi perspective. All of these are actors that represent a constant theme in history, which is what we would call meta history. You see, and I think it goes back to the Irfani way of looking at history. Where based upon the prophetic quotation, the hadith that says, most people are asleep, and it is only when they die that they wake up. Okay. The Great Order of Five interprets that to mean that even your life is something that you need to interpret. Just as when you see something while you're sleeping in a dream, you need to interpret that. While you are living, you should be able to interpret what is happening to you. You know what I mean? That what is happening between us here is apparent, is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
You see, there's something much more profound going on here.
100%.
All right?
Yeah.
You know, I am you and you are me. Just like in a dream, for example, you know, where everything in a dream is you. You see what I mean? And I think this way of looking at Karbala as meta history is very important. You know, so for example, there are some times when we are not under threat, and it is easy for us to be Hussaini, okay? You know, to help somebody when they need help and so forth. It might be a different thing if, for example, helping that person could put you in potential danger, okay? It might be also that a person, they might be a good person, quote unquote, you know, but they love their family so much they're willing to sell them out or sell out themselves for their family. You know what I mean? So in certain circumstances, you might be Hussaini. In certain circumstances, we might be Abbasi. In certain circumstances, we might be Kufi, you know, in terms of knowing what is right, but standing on the side of what is wrong. You know, so I think Karbala gives us this opportunity to reflect upon ourselves in every phase of life, in every action that we are doing, because we are playing this part in ourselves as to which side we are on.
So when we talk about meta history, do you mean that this is history that transcends basically just the physical kind of dimension of things, but also transcends into the spiritual dimension and the mental dimension and the inner dimensions of the human being themselves, basically?
Yes, it is basically holistic in the sense that it transcends the outward world. In other words, there are Karbala instances that we find ourselves in the outer world, you know, and it also reflects our internal struggle in the inner world.
Okay. When we look at this, the statement, for example, every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala, do you feel that that kind of also is reflected in this same kind of concept of meta history?
Yes, exactly. You know, it tends to have a more outward type of approach, right? You know, everywhere, every place is Karbala. You know, and place is situated in space, and you know, and every day is Ashura, which means every time. You know what I mean? It can be easily interpreted that way, and it tends to have that weight towards that area. But it can be applied to the other aspect.
How would you respond to people that, for example, would say that this statement, it goes against the hadith of the Imam, for example, Imam al-Hassan? He says, there's no day like yours, O Aba Abdillah. Would you say that this is in contradiction to that hadith, or would you say that it builds on the meaning of that hadith?
Yeah, that's a really good point that you are bringing up, you know, on behalf of those people who don't think too well. I think, you know, it really goes back to the distinction, and I rather call it distinction rather than difference, between archetype and an instance of an archetype.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Take, for example, motherhood. Okay. Motherhood is archetypal. Okay, in the sense that motherhood is a sort of an adjective or a state that involves all mothers, and not only this, but the ideal mother. Okay, every mother after that or outside of that is an instance of that archetype. Okay, you know what I mean? That in there, they might not reflect the full archetype because that's pure perfection. You see what I mean? Yeah. All right? But they might show something like, for example, selflessness for their children. This is an aspect of that archetype. See what I mean? And so we see there's not a contradiction between this statement that there's no day like the day of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, you know. And for example, what's happening in Gaza right now with the slaughter of many babies and so forth, right? There's no difference. It's just that one is sort of have an archetypal relationship, a more perfect relationship with that. You see what I mean? I take for
whereby that would be the archetype, and this is just an instance.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and I think we have to be really be sort of unafraid to think like this.
And you mentioned, of course, that we have parts of us that are Hussaini, parts of us that are Abbasi, parts of us that are Zainabi, parts of us that are Shimri,
Right.
parts of us that are Yazidi. If somebody was to allow that Yazidi part of him to take over and to overcome his actions and the way that he is as a person, would that individual not be categorized by that?
But yes, he definitely will be. If he lets that negative aspect of himself be dominant, then he is actually in himself dominant. And he will find attraction to Yazidi types of behavior. You know what I mean? Yeah, so we go back to what, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, who, when he went to the grave of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, made a statement that said, we went over the valleys and over the hills and so forth with you when we were with you, when we were being oppressed and so forth. And Atiyah asked him, well, how could you say that when you weren't there? You go to meta history, right? He said the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi told him that if you like a people, you'll be resurrected with them. And if you agree with their actions, you will be also responsible for those actions.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And so, what is this attraction then? What is this attraction to being, being resurrected with the people because you like them, you love them? Okay, and identifying with their actions. So what leads you to this? Your own nafs, your own self. That means if you have created and cultivated a Yazidi tendency in yourself, then you will find attraction to Yazidi type of people. You will find attraction to Yazidi type of behaviors and so forth. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You know, there must be something in you to resonate with that person, because that's what love is. Huh? You have negative love and you have positive love, right? Thieves have a negative love for each other. Thieves love thieves. You see what I mean? So you have to have some kind of affinity with the thing that you love, and a repulsion to the thing that you hate. And that has to do with yourself.
Right. Okay. So moving on with the conversation, when we look at the spiritual dimension of Karbala, how would you try and describe it if somebody was to think about this in an academic sense and an Arafani sense? And you mentioned, of course, there's an Arafani perspective to this. Can you explain a few of the principles that you would use in order to kind of categorize the spiritual dimension of Karbala for an individual individually? So if I was myself wanted to take spiritual lessons from Karbala, what would be the principles by which I would be able to apply those lessons into the world today?
The annihilation of the self, the annihilation of the ego, the annihilation of all the things that the ego is attached to, or the ego finds important for its self-validation.
Yeah.
That way, right? Irfan is all about the annihilation of the ego. What we have with Imam Hussain alayhi salam on the battlefield is exactly that, the complete annihilation of his ego. Okay? The other thing is, a lot of people think that, with Irfan, that you're supposed to reach a certain, ideally, you're supposed to reach a certain height where you don't have any more tests, But if you really look at Irfan, you find the tests get harder and harder, as you progress. But it doesn't become a torture. It's just like being in the gym. Right? You want to increase your strength or whatever. You work harder and harder. But in that working harder, there is a pleasure in that, even though it is pain, and the result of it is something that you are proud of, that you are happy about. I think it's the same thing. So as you move upward, higher and higher, the tests become harder and harder. And what we see with Imam Hussain alayhi salam is an outward dynamic performance, where he is facing the most difficult situation, and he feels it. This is another thing. Okay, we tend to think of our Aima as people who are like robots. They don't feel, they don't suffer, and so on. Because why would they suffer? You know what I mean? They know God's plan, and it's all going to be all going to work. Love is love, man. You know what I mean? Right? I love my kid. My kid is going to be going away to study somewhere.
Would you even say that would be almost like a disrespect to the imams to say that they don't feel those emotions?
Exactly. It removes them from them being examples to us. No, they felt pain. They felt pain. The only pain that a shaheed does not feel is the actual blow that kills them. That's the only pain. Right? Everything else, they feel the pain. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the seal of the Prophet said, "No prophet has suffered more than myself." All right? And we might say, well, Yahya got his head cut off, and this happened to this one, and this happened to that one. This didn't happen to you. Again, we go back to archetype and instance. All right? It is not how many, it's not quantity. But it is the quality of the person that is undergoing this type of thing, and that quality of the person is a very important thing that tells us that they suffer, and that's their task, in terms of overcoming themselves and getting close to Allah.
What is it that meant that Karbala had to happen? We see in the letter of Imam al-Hussain, or maybe it was in a conversation of Imam al-Hussain, where he says the famous statement, and he's asked about why he's going to Karbala, why is he going to do this, and he says, "Sha'Allah an yarani qatila." Allah has wished to see me killed. And then when he's asked about his women, he says, "Sha'Allah an yarahunna sabaya." Allah wished to see them taken as prisoners. What is the philosophy that surrounds this? What was the reason why this had to happen? Because I think we do have the kind of the privilege of sometimes looking backwards to Karbala and saying that this is why, this is what we can take from Karbala. This is what we can learn from Karbala. This is the history that is associated with Karbala. But a lot of the time we don't ask the question, why did it have to happen? Was it necessary that Imam al-Hussain is killed and martyred in order to save the religion? Was it necessary? Like, what was it strategically that mattered here, that meant that this had to happen? Why did Allah wish for this to happen?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the Saqifa, basically. All right? Where right after the passing away of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the arguments that came up about successorship to him, the pragmatic side, put it that way, right?
Okay.
Because Umar said, look, and we tend to think he was jealous of him, of Imam Ali. I don't go so low. I think it's just pragmatism to the hilt.
Okay.
Overcomes divine wisdom. Okay?
Okay.
He said the Quraysh cannot tolerate Nubuwa and Imama in the same tribe, in the same family. All right? It's something pragmatic. It might not be true. Okay? All right. So you had the Saqifa. And the Saqifa was basically, how should I say, a coup d'etat. Okay? By people who thought they had a better idea as to who should run the Islamic Ummah or not. And this opens up, because of its impropriety, okay, it opens up the possibility of the insinuation of the shaitan.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
And so we find that at the death of Imam Ali alayhi salam, all right, then the consequences of that pragmatic approach starts to manifest itself. All right? And so we move from a spiritual leadership, because remember, from a Shia point of view, okay, it's always a spiritual and a temporal leadership to combine. From a Sunni point of view,
It's only
implied by the fact that the Khulafa Rashidun
right.
are the ones that are running it.
Correct.
All right? It's
rightly
a spiritual.
Guided. It is spiritual also.
Also, from
Yeah.
that perspective.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
But we see at the end of the last Khalifa Rashid,
Yeah.
all right, what do you find? You find that now it becomes a de facto, dynastic type of a process. Now, by the time we get to Yazid, all right, which is what? One generation after the Holy Prophet, maybe one can say, because, Muawiyah was in the time of the generation of the Prophet, right? About one generation, things started to fall apart, okay? By virtue of Muawiyah coming to power, whose interest was largely interest of power and not of spirituality and guidance and so forth, you have Yazid. And Yazid is outwardly flagrant against going against the rules of Islam and so forth. And so this is leading to a kind of a cognitive dissonance among the people.
The Muslims, yeah.
All right? Here we have the person who is the head of the Muslims, who's supposed to be our spiritual guide, and he's coming to
of the Prophet.
Exactly. He's coming to lead prayer drunk and so forth and so on. All right? And so what Imam Hussain has to do is to rise up against this. But the generality of people are cowed, refuse to do anything, even including companions who are around. They felt bad in their hearts about this, but they did nothing. You know, and so Imam Hussain alayhi salam was alone. I mean, there were a couple of others like Zubair and all of these people, Ibn Zubair and so forth, who also opposed. But by and large, all of them were destined to lose because they had such a small following, including Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So Imam Hussain alayhi salam decides, well, I'm going to stand up. And because he was the most prominent among them, the grandson of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the two chiefs of the youth in paradise, okay, he goes to the battlefield and he takes his family. Okay, now I think, why does he take his family? Okay, I think it goes back to the profound effect of women and children in terms of awakening the heart.
Sahih, yeah.
Right? And so you have Hazrat Zainab, salamu alayha, who represents the role of women. In other words, the role of the jihad of the tongue. Okay? Who maintains that history. Okay? And the suffering of the children that evoke in our hearts. And I think this is what created a revolution on the inside of people that brought Islam back on track.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do feel that then after that Islam came back on track?
It came back on track, yes.
And how would you describe that? Because so when you say that this started with the period of Saqifa, and this what you described as a pragmatic approach leading to Yazid coming into power, an individual that did not care about spirituality and was not religious at all, you believe that following this that the leadership was better? Or how would we say that Islam came back on track?
The leadership had to behave better.
Okay.
Remember, Imam Ali alayhi salam did not attack Muawiyah earlier on. Okay? And why? Because Muawiyah was practicing Islam outwardly, not inwardly. By the time we got to Yazid, the inward corruption started to overwhelm the outward facade.
Right.
Okay? What we're talking about here is that the Abbasids and all of them that came afterwards, they had to conform, at least outwardly, to Islam.
Okay.
Which led to, for example, them, implementing Islamic laws in trade and penal codes and, the works. All right? They were still corrupt. There's no doubt about that. But outwardly, no, they had to behave themselves.
I see. Okay. You mentioned a group of people here that loved the Imam, and they saw that what was happening to Imam Hussain was incorrect, but they did nothing. right? How do we take that kind of, or let's not say archetype, because obviously they're not the perfect ideal, but how do we take that kind of concept of people and how do we apply that to our time? Of course, the Imam in our time is in a ghaiba and is in occultation, not there in front of our eyes, not apparent in front of our eyes, but we also have a responsibility towards him, surely, with regards to protection and his mission and putting forward the mission of Allah on earth. How would you describe those individuals at the time of Imam Hussain that didn't support him, despite knowing that he was the correct individual to support? And how do we draw a parallel there from a perspective of meta history as to how we are expected to support the Imam of our time in this time of ghaiba?
That's a good point. I mean, look, our test is this right now in our lives. And if we don't do this, we're not proper Shias or not proper Muslims. Okay? Who is your Yazid? Who is the Yazid in your environment, in your workplace, in your university, on the street, in the government? Who is the Yazid that you have to deal with? All right? And how am I responding to that Yazid? Right? Am I afraid of that Yazid to the extent that I'm afraid that my life is going to be ruined and therefore I will tolerate him and maybe I pretend to be on his side? Or am I going to, respond to that Yazid by telling them I can't remove them, maybe, for example, by telling them who they are and how they should behave themselves. Okay? We know that exhorting the right and forbidding the wrong is the essence of all good in Islam, every good. Okay? And we also know that we as human beings living in society, each and every single one of us has a right and a duty, to exhort for justice in the society in which we live. All right? If we don't do these things, it means our faith is weak. It goes back to the statement of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, whenever a Muslim confronts an evil, they must either remove it with their hands, speak out about it with their tongues, or hate it in their heart. And that's the least of Iman. That least of Iman is the most dangerous place to be. Okay? Because, you have hadith that says, for example, Holy Prophet says a hadith about, Hazrat Sohail, I believe it was, okay, where there was a town of 100,000 people or so, and only 40,000 of them were evildoers and 60,000 of them were good worshippers. And Allah said, I'm going to punish all of them because why? Because of the 40,000 who were the minority, the 60,000 who were the majority in a case like this, did not do anything about the minority who were doing bad, right? That 60,000 is the least of Iman. Yeah. Okay.
Although they're doing good, supposedly.
But they know they're doing good, but they're not changing the evil of the people in the society. All right? And usually you find that in materialist societies or societies where the good people don't stop the evil people, the evil might be a minority, but they dominate, like Western societies today. Okay? They're all oligarchies. All right, they're not democracies as such. They're the rule of the minority. All right. So yeah, I think this is our test. Okay, this is our test. And indeed, what we find is we see in our face that the effect of the lack of Islamic unity. In the whole world, we see that the Muslim governments are not uniting to fight Israel in defense of the Palestinians. All right? And this is the same type, and so it's the Muslim community's lack of organized responses that is encouraging Israel to do what it is doing with impunity because they know they have nobody to answer to. All right? So I think what Islam is really against is against our cooperation with fasad. Okay? And cooperation is either you encourage it or you do not discourage it. That's also cooperation as well.
Okay, so when we're looking at standing up for justice, would you feel that, for example, now, if we were to go and protest, would we be fulfilling our responsibility completely? Where is the kind of line where I have now kind of, in living in the West with our limitations, because obviously I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this thinking, okay, I've done my best, I've done a protest, or some people might be thinking, I've done a protest, am I doing enough? Right? So is there any kind of way of knowing whether you are doing enough? Is there any kind of way of being able to kind of clarify for yourself whether you are in the correct state of support towards the Imam of your time or not? Is there any way of kind of knowing that for sure?
Standing up against injustice is in conformity with the actions of the Imam of our time. Just standing up for justice is in conformity with this. Okay, standing up for some people criticize, for example, oh, you go demonstrating, and in the demonstration you might have some gays there, you might have some non-believers there, you know, and so forth and so on, and you know, it's not Islamic, so you should stay at home. All right, I want to say something about that. Okay, there's a very, very beautiful example of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was a youth, before he was even married. Okay, and he was asked while being a prophet, what was the most important activity that you did while you were a youth before you were a prophet, something to that effect.
Okay,
and he said the thing I'm most proud of was being a participant in the Hilful Fudul.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And the Hilful Fudul was what? A group of Meccan youth sees a case of oppression in the society, in which meant in that time, you know, people who did not have tribal backing were easily ripped off or abused in that society. And they decided they were going to do something about it and stand up for these powerless people.
Yeah.
And he joined them. Now, who are these guys? It doesn't say in the hadith, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, I can tell you something, man. I believe that most of them were probably mushrikeen.
Yeah. It's likely that they were.
All right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's allying with these mushrikeen guys to change society.
And it was something that he was proud of.
And he was proud of. All right? And then we have, for example, when he became the ruler of Medina. You know, and they created the Medinan constitution. And all the groups in that Medina, Mushrikeen, Jews, Christians, and Muslims decide, look, this is our society. We all have a right to defend it, you know, and maintain its security, you know, and stand up for each other. This is us here in this society right now. Okay? And the line in the sand for everyone in this entire world, Muslim and non-Muslim, for human beings, is Palestine. All right? Because here we have a kind of oppression, you know, viciousness, you know, mass murder that we haven't seen in over 200 years. That more bombs are dropped on people living in tents than were dropped in Dresden or in the whole of World War I and World War II. Okay? That's what we're dealing with. Okay? And so it's clear for everybody. I believe it's a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, we should enter into partnerships or collaboration with all those people who in their heart, like those youth in the time of the Hilful Fudul, okay, to go on the street and practice the resistance to oppression with the tongue. Because that's what a demonstration is all about. The last part thing I want to say about demonstrations, we should never underestimate demonstrations. Demonstrations for the majority of the 20th century, okay, and including the 21st century, has been one of the major means by which governments have fallen. You know, if you look at, for example, the revolution in Iran, you know, a major aspect of the fall of the Shah with demonstrations. Okay? They could even use demonstrations negatively to overthrow any government you want. Like, for example, the demonstrations that overthrew the pro-Russian government in Ukraine that brought in Zelensky. Okay? So we should not underestimate demonstrations, but we should know the science of demonstrations. You know, and this is where I think we need to sort of study.
Sorry, do you mean elaborating on that? What do you mean by the science of demonstrations?
Well, the science of demonstrations, for example, we could learn from other demonstrations and how they operated. One of the aspects of demonstrations, like for example, in the civil rights movement in the United States of America in the 60s, was a demonstration apart from the very important role of demonstrating to people, showing themselves to people that all of us here are of this opinion, gives encouragement to others who also have the same opinion to feel safety and camaraderie by seeing other people demonstrating that, so they join. So demonstration is something like that, to show outwardly what people are sort of thinking inwardly. All right? The other aspect of a demonstration,
I wanted to also link this demonstration kind of aspect to, for example, the walk of Arba'een,
yes,
and the Arba'een procession that we have in London, and from that perspective, the science of demonstration. You mentioned, of course, camaraderie, right?
Yes.
When we see, obviously, people are going to the Arba'een procession, everybody kind of gets excited to go there as well. But how would you combine those two things in terms of a demonstration and something for Imam al-Hussain in order to bring the correct message of Ashura? And do you think that we're doing that correctly at the moment?
Well, yeah, let me just finish the demonstration thing, the lesson for the demonstration, right? So a demonstration is, first of all, for two reasons. One, to identify and proclaim to other people one's opposition to something that's very important, right? And secondly, to organize. So you'd find that after a demonstration, all right, you would have the person at the end of the demonstration saying something like, okay, guys, thank you all very much. And in, let's say, North London, at in the basement of the church of so and so and so, every Friday, we would have gatherings there to talk about what's happening in Palestine and what we can do. You know what I mean? In the east side of London, we have Masjid so and so, you can meet there, and so forth and so on. You see? So what you have here is now, people meeting each other, right? Networking, etc., etc. And this helps to create a wider and more informed population. Now, with respect to Arba'een, I think Arba'een is a bit different.
Okay.
All right, Arba'een is more sort of spiritual. Okay, so I won't lump Arba'een in the same breath as, let's say, for example, a pro-Palestinian demonstration.
No, of course.
Although, Arba'een could fulfill the two.
Exactly.
All right, like for example, the theme in Arba'een this year, for example, could be Palestine. You see what I mean? Right? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So one thing I really liked what you mentioned was about the fact of organization. Yeah, and when we're looking at the message of Karbala and we are linking it to the mission of the Imam of our time, when we talk about organization and strategy and things like that, there's a lot of people in our communities that like to kind of switch off in Muharram. They like to come to the mosque, listen to the lecture, enjoy the poetry, do the latham, eat their food, and go home. That's how a lot of people want to think of Muharram. They want to see it as something that they commemorate every year, as an art form, something that they relate to, something that they are emotional for, and to leave it there. Now, when you say organization and strategy, these are surely things that the mission of the Imam of our time is going to need anyway. And with us having the gift of Muharram every year, the gift of Arba'een every year, which is a place where all of us are going to gather anyway, right? There is no need for anybody to organize anything. Everybody's going to be there to commemorate Muharram and Imam al-Hussain. How important are these gatherings in forming the foundation for strategy, for organization, for actual things that need to be done in service to the Imam of our time? Is it that these are the actual foundations of those gatherings and the strategy? Because obviously we also see that there's an immense connection between Imam al-Hussain and Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Imam al-Mahdi, when he comes back, the supporters of Imam al-Mahdi, one of their greatest slogans will be Ya la Tharat al-Hussain, right? Oh, for the revenge of Imam al-Hussain. Imam al-Mahdi, in his first khutbah, he mentions Imam al-Hussain as his father many times in his sermon. So is it that we should be looking at the kind of commemoration in Muharram and Arba'in as well as being a spiritual experience, a experience of mourning, also a experience where we are supposed to think and organize ourselves and strategize?
Yes. Yeah? And I don't think it has to occur in Muharram itself. Yes, it can, right? But I think the leaders of the Muslim community, okay, whom I have a big problem with, by and large, okay? This is the role of the leaders of the Muslim community. Yeah. All right? I think that many of the leaders, I would maybe even say 80, 85, 90% of the leaders in the Shia Muslim community, right, want to keep the followers on the level of hating oppression in their heart. Okay? They do not entertain any kind of strategization around spreading the message, around criticizing what needs to be criticized, around organizing their people to be able to face these difficulties. I mean, look, my friend, you know, I would say maybe in the next 20 years, right, at least, okay, to 30 years, the West is going to be on a big decline.
Absolutely.
All right, we see Europe now, for example, just killing its own self with self-inflicted wounds by their mindless following of the great shaitan of today. This is from Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah, and he's so true about this. Okay? There will be a time in these countries where life is going to be very difficult, not just for Muslims alone. It will be especially difficult for Muslims, but for other people, all right, as well, in terms of the oppression and the movement towards a fascistic type of state, what they call it, the official cryptocurrencies, and being able to plot your movements and all these types of things, right? You know, and we need to be preparing our people for this. What are we going to do? How are we going to arrange ourselves here? What is the next move we should make? This is what we should be planning. This is what our leaders should be planning. Okay? But most of our leaders, for example, might be living here in the West for 30, 40, 50 years and have no idea of the West. They can't even read a newspaper. Okay?
So is it those specific leaders that you're speaking about?
I'm speaking about people like that.
Okay.
Right? I'm speaking about people, for example, who are in positions where they're there to guide families and they have no idea how to deal with, for example, spousal abuse in a family. You know, people who would tell a wife, stay with the husband while he's beating her to a pulp every day, for example. You know what I mean? Just, you know. So, I think really we need to increase people's awareness, you know, of how to take Karbala, as it were, onto the street. Take Karbala in your daily life. That same meta-historical type of argument. We need to get people to think like this. And our leaders, if they can do this, I say we because I'm among them, you know, if they can do this, right, they will raise the level of the people to the extent, like, for example, how Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah, raised the level of the people of Iran from the lowest peasant, you know what I mean, to the highest middle class doctor or whatever, you know, how to change your society. You know, we can show, for example, how the resistance movement in Lebanon, for example, with this Karbala spirit, was able to resist and to defeat the fifth largest and most powerful organized army in the world, Israel. You know what I mean? We need to be able to show this and to empower our people. You know, but as long as our leaders are too afraid of Yazid, okay, we are going to be in trouble.
Very interesting. So just to kind of get towards the end and finish off on the conversation, what would you recommend as a blueprint for us to be able to understand that service? Like, if we were to say, for example, recommend some sort of reading, any kind of literature, Quranic or hadith wise, because this podcast in general on Jumah Nights, we like to familiarize the viewers with Shia classical literature and with the Quran and hadith. Is there anything that you could recommend for our viewers, for them to be able to read or to be able to understand, in order for them to kind of be able to philosophize and build principles from the lessons that we learn from Karbala, and how to stand up to oppression in our time?
I mean, I don't really have anything quotable, to tell you the truth, right? It's just based upon my studies and so forth. But I think, you can find the certain elements of this, the fundamental principles of this, by reading about the Islamic Revolution in Iran, particularly. You know what I mean? And about the Western imposed war with Iraq. You know what I mean? And how this theme of Karbala has been ever recurrent, and has defined the success of the Islamic Revolution, right? And its longevity in the face of all of these difficulties. And I think in reading these things, you'll come to a conclusion like mine. You know what I mean? I'm not coming up here with anything original. You know what I mean? I'm coming up here with, what I have seen as what has made the Hussaini revolution successful in today's world. And I think when the Imam of our time comes, it will be something like this, because the Dajjal, is going to be a mass murderer. The Dajjal is going to be not only a mass murderer in terms of lives of people, but also in terms of the spiritual lives, of decimating our spiritual lives and making us animals.
So, okay, this is an interesting point. When you say spiritually decimation, do you believe that the battle then is being fought on multiple fronts?
Absolutely.
You believe the battle is not only physical, but also a spiritual collective battle.
Spiritual, propagandistic.
Do you believe it's collective?
Yeah. And because the good people are going to get together. The good people are to get together and to change things. Post-democratic society, or post-democratic powers are afraid of the power of the people. They're afraid of that, right? And this is why they create all these different things, LGBTQ plus and environment and this and that and the other, as ways to keep people fighting among each other and arguing with each other, and ignoring who runs and controls the whole society. All right? So, in this post-democratic society, it is for us to create consensus. It's for us to create a unity. It's for us to devise the right type of speech to try to bring everybody. One of my tactics in Tabligh sometimes is not to say I'm here as a Muslim to bring you to Islam, because people, when they hear this, they hear, oh, you want to bring me into religion, I want to have nothing to do with that. I'm going all the way around like a guerrilla fighter. You know what I'm saying? I'm going into your village before I get to your internal city. I'm going to control the entire surroundings of your city. All right? And I'll talk with them in an indirect way. You see what I mean? So I think, these are all strategies that we need to make. Allegiances and connections that we need to establish with all, freedom-loving, people in the world. The story about the Brahmins who heard about Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and they decided. Now we sit here and say, oh, he's mushrikeen. But there's something deeper in them. Because this, our fitrah is the fitrah of a muwahid. Okay? The fitrah of people who, when they see justice, they love it. When they see injustice, they don't like it. All human beings are like this. This is what we have to appeal to people to bring them on board.
Ahsantum. And this reminds me of one of the narrations that mention that when the Imam returns, you will see people that you believe to be upon Tawheed to go against him, and you will see people that you thought to be worshippers of the sun and the moon supporting him.
Exactly.
So this is definitely one of the ways that we can bring people towards this mission. Obviously, is going to be through the philosophy of Karbala and Imam Hussain, because it is a matter of justice and injustice, and like you said, it's within the fitrah, and any kind of human being will be able to see where the right and the wrong is on either case. Inshallah, that's I hope that's a beneficial conversation for our viewers. I hope that we were able to learn a lot. I was certainly able to learn a lot with regards to, we spoke to the spiritual dimension, we spoke about the physical dimension, and we also spoke about meta history. So I'm sure that there's a lot of new vocabulary that the viewers have learned, inshallah. And I'm glad that we've been able to have you as well. It's also probably a good thing for our viewers that they don't have to listen to me alone and get bored of my books and my Quran. So thank you so much, Sheikh, for being part of this conversation. We're truly honored to have you, and inshallah we hope that we're able to have more conversations like this in the future. Inshallah, we'll be seeing you again next week, where we'll be having our next podcast episode, and we'll bring another special guest, inshallah. So I'll see you again for that next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.